Okay, let's start. See, earlier we have seen about implementing a servlet interface. Fine, we wrote hello servlet by implementing the servlet interface. We understand there is a life cycle of a servlet. Object of servlet will be created by the container. Servlet config is created first by looking at the servlet tag. Fine, picks up the parameters and puts the object of servlet config into the servlet object. And then when we write our code, we have to implement 5 methods at least. Fine, to write a servlet. Now, instead of, if you look at those 5 methods, some of those methods like get servlet config, always what we'll have is, yes, whenever we write a servlet, we should have a private variable for the servlet config. We should, and then we'll be implementing the get servlet config method. Fine. So let's create some base class where from which we can always inherit and create our servlet classes. Fine. We can have one base class which we can develop, which can be used for later on whenever we want to create a whenever we want to write a servlet. Instead of implementing 5 methods, for us maybe what is most of the time going to change is the service method. Other methods more or less are going to be same. Okay, fine. So let's try to develop such a class. Let's call it as a base servlet. So let's create a class called base servlet. Let's see how we go about and create such a class. Okay. Okay. So let's develop this class called base servlet. So yeah, let me write the code here. Okay. So how will do this? Yeah, you might have a package entry. Package. We can go on the same lines. Com dot of Java dot Java 602 dot servlet. That was the package we had. Need import. We'll adjust the we'll add more imports when needed. Fine. We need import for Java dot Java X dot servlet. Fine. Here, what we can do is we can leave the service method abstract, since that's the one which is going to change all the time. And we can have this as an abstract class also. So we can have this one as an abstract class, okay, which where overriding of service method should be done. Okay. So javax.servlet dot will have to implement servlet interface. We'll have import for javax dot servlet dot servlet config. Okay, need import for java.io.io. Or we don't need this one, right? Because that's the one which will not override at all. The service method will not be overriding. Any other thing you will need? Servlet context probably. Let's start writing this class. So we have our class, public class called base servlet. Okay, it would also be abstract. Public and abstract class base servlet, which implements the servlet interface. So we are writing this to implement our servlet interface. Okay, fine. What we'll need? Private variable or servlet config, right? And then we'll implement public method returns void. Init method requires parameter as servlet config. What's going to be the code here? It has to do this one, right? This dot config equal to cfg. That's okay. Right. But then I'm writing this as a base class, right? We are writing it as a base class, and we would like that, see, initialization, right? So people are going to inherit from this. They were fine. They would like to inherit from this, but then over and above just doing some initialization which is related to the servlet config, the other classes which inherit from this may like to have their own initialization, additional initialization. One initialization is the servlet config object needs to be set. Okay, that is one. But they would have their own different initialization. Fine, they might like to have their initialization. So what we might do here is we might say, okay, fine. Now this is something which we would like to happen all the time, right? Config must be getting initialized whenever init is called. This should not be changed. We would not like people to override this method, because if they override the method, it's likely that this initialization will be forgotten. They may not use super.init when they override this method. Okay, fine. So let's take care of that part so that no one overrides this method. We'll make it as final. But to make a provision for additional initialization, what we might do is we might say, okay, we'll provide you with a method called init. And so we add a method here which can be overridden. So this is the one which they may override. Init without parameters, and for us here it's not doing anything. Okay. The idea here is, if you when you create a subclass, if you have your initialization, put it in the other init method. Fine, we can have this. Okay, and then let's have the other method, public method returns servlet config, get servlet config. We are implementing the servlet interface, so we'll have the get servlet config. And what we do in this get servlet config, return this dot config. That's simple. Okay. Now again, fine. Just to be on a safer side, what we can do here is we do not want this also to be overridden by a subclass. Fine. In the init, we are setting the servlet config. Fine. And therefore, this also we would not like someone to override. Okay. So this method also we can make it final. It's a good idea to keep it final. Fine. So get servlet config is not changed and is always returning the config object which was initialized with the init method. Okay, we have additional init method which the subclass can always override, and we are designing a base class, right, which should be useful for anyone now onwards writing a servlet. He need not be implementing all the 5 methods. And that's the idea with which we are writing this class and developing it as a base class for future. Okay, fine. Okay, so next thing, yeah, what are the other methods? Oh, one more point, like we have what, get servlet config returning a servlet config. It would be useful even in the subclass. If someone needs a config object, fine, he can just say get servlet config, right? The subclass can just say get servlet config. Since this is servlet config, object is private, right? He would be using get servlet config. Now in servlet config, there is object of servlet context. Okay, so we can even provide the method called get servlet config context. Fine, useful information. Fine, even the context parameters which are there, or even the instead of context parameter, the servlet related parameters which are there, they are available from the servlet config. Fine, someone will have to write a method. When someone wants them, he'll have to use the method get servlet config dot get init parameter. Or instead of doing that, let's make it simple for him. Let's provide the get servlet get init parameter right in this place itself, because we got the servlet config object and we can write that. Okay, so let's add those methods, right? Okay, so let's add some methods like this. So we add a method, public method, and this method will return, again we can make this final, to return servlet context. Method name is get servlet context. And it is quite simple, right? You can just say return this dot config dot get servlet context. And information from servlet config is something which will be useful even in the subclass, right? So it should be usable, right? So we have actually only 4 methods in the servlet config, right? All those 4 methods could be here. And in this base class, we can provide all those 4 methods. Config dot, we can just use those methods. You can invoke those methods on this object. Okay. And these are getter methods, right? So we can even have method called to return, final method to return a string, get servlet name, and if someone needs a name, that it be available. It says nothing, but we are forwarding the method to servlet config, providing the methods of servlet config right here itself. Okay. Public and final methods, we are just writing those same methods which are there in the servlet config. Or rather, see, we have said, okay, this implements, we can make one more change on top. So this one is implementing methods of and we are implementing methods of servlet and also servlet config. And all those methods are useful for servlet, right? Okay, so we're saying this one implements both of them, and let's add the other methods here. Final method to return a enumeration of string. Method name is get init parameter names. This one is saying return this dot config dot get init parameter names. And just simply forwarding to the servlet config. And to implement methods of servlet config. And see, these are 4 methods of servlet config, right? Public, we are keeping it final so that they don't get, no one overrides them, right? Returning a string, get init parameter name, get init parameter, right? Get init parameter. Get init parameter, that's a method there, right? And this method requires a string as parameter. The parameter name, what is the parameter name? And the parameter name is the, this method has a parameter called parameter name. Right? So for a parameter name, init parameter name, you get the corresponding value. Right? So get init parameter, right? That's a method. And this is method from servlet config. Right? So 4 methods of servlet config we have implemented, right? And get servlet context, get servlet name, get init parameter names, get init parameter. Okay, fine. Methods of servlet also needs to be implemented. We have implemented init method, we have implemented get servlet config method. Okay. Okay. Fine. Other methods of servlet, public method. We have the destroy method. And by default, yes, in this base class, what we are doing is fine. That there will be destroy. If someone wants, he can override. We are not doing anything in destroy. When we wrote the hello servlet, we didn't have anything to do in destroy. Fine. So if someone wants, yes, he can always override this. Fine. But we have an implementation which is not doing anything. Okay. In same way, let's write the other method. We have the public method returns string get servlet info, and the method is get servlet info. Okay, this was, yeah, how was it? What we have done was we have returned the it has a limit. Text box seems to have a limit. Number of characters. It's limited by number of characters. It seems. Huh? Mm-hmm. Okay. Fine. Where do I the extra characters? This. Still, there's one more method. I think. Yeah. Okay. Let me explain this. How do we implement the get servlet info? You have get servlet info. Okay. Uh, Fine. Let me paste one more text box. Probably that should help. Keep it just below this. Yeah. Okay. I think that should be sufficient. Mhm. That should be in line, right? Lovely. Okay. Let's add this. Let me try pushing it just below this. Okay. Fine. Let's. Fine. I think in the first box, let's see what we have here in the first box. Fine. The last thing was we were writing get servlet info, right? Let's continue in the new box over here. Okay. So implementation of, or I'll rewrite that. Okay. Fine. The method part. Here the method as public method return string get servlet info. That's a method to be returned. And this would say get servlet info. By default, no, we can't decide what copyright and what they should have, right? So let's return a empty string. And so this can be implementation of, okay. So what we have done so far is we have implemented methods of servlet. Okay, fine. We have only implemented 4 methods of servlet, right? Out of the 5. Service, we have left it blank because that's the one which will be decided by the subclass. Totally fine. That's something which has to be written altogether. Fine. Other methods, yeah, init method. Yes, you have one additional. We provided an additional init. Fine. Get servlet config. It has to be the way it is, right? Methods like destroy. Okay. By default, we don't do anything. Fine. Now, fine. These are the useful things we have tried to pick up from servlet config. We realize that methods of servlet config, if we make them available, that may be useful. Fine. We make the methods of servlet config available right in the base class itself. So methods like get servlet context, get init parameter names, get init parameter, the get servlet name, those methods we have implemented. Okay, so these are nothing but convenience, right? Okay, let's add another convenience which we have. Okay, We have even in servlet context, there's something which may be very commonly be used in a subclass. Servlet context has a method called log. This method is used for writing into the log of the container. And our container keeps a log. Okay, so if you want to put any entry into that log where it will do a time stamping, okay, so some string, some message you want to put or something, okay, from your application, fine, you should be able to do that. So we have two such methods in servlet context. Log method, yes, you may log a simple message, or sometimes because there is an exception which you have caught somewhere in the service method, you might be doing some, maybe you try a database connection, it fails. Maybe you don't want to fail the method, but you would like to log it. Even before failing, you may like to write into the log of the container. Okay, so to access the log of the container, we have this method called log available in servlet context. We can make that method available in our base class itself. Okay, so base class we can provide the method called log. Okay, so we write this method called public method. You can make it final. Okay, returns void, name of the method is log, and takes as parameter a string, a message to be logged. Okay, and what we need to do here is we can simply invoke this method on the servlet context. So we have the get servlet context already. Dot log, message can be logged. And log is method on servlet context. Okay, so we are providing that log method here, and log with two parameters also. Two parameters, you may have a message as well as a throwable object. Okay. And so this is nothing but we are forwarding the method to the servlet context. Parameter is message and throwable. So that's the way we may like to write our base class. Fine. So we might like to write our base class in this manner. Fine. Okay. What I'll do is in the earlier box, which we have here, okay, I can get rid of this part, so it's not repeated. Fine. Fine. So now it comes okay. Fine. So this looks okay. Fine. We have the package entry. We have the imports. Yeah, imports are not complete. Let's try to complete the imports. Okay, for completing import again, maybe I'll even pick up the destroy method from here and put it below. I need some space here. Last few methods can be picked up. This, I think get init parameter name, get init parameter onwards. Okay, fine. So we put this here, and in this box, I would like to complete all the import declarations here. Okay, what are all the imports you may need? You need import for enumeration, java.util.enumeration. You need import for as enumeration. What else? What else we have used in this? Servlet context we have used, that has been, yeah, we have made a import for that. Is there anything else? I think servlet context config, both have come, right? Okay, fine. And so that's the overall thing which we have, right? And so that's like our class definition, right? A base class. Now onwards, if we want to write our class, for example, we wanted to write the info servlet, right? Which can give information from servlet context and to try out the various methods. What we can do is simply inherit from base servlet, extend base servlet, override the service method. And if anything else, yes, we may override the init method if there is some new initialization required. Fine, we may initialize, we may override the get servlet info method. Fine. Fine, so a good class as a base class. Fine, so now onwards we can always try to use this. So that's a good idea. But one more thing. Yes, we have developed it as part of one application. Fine. So in this application, yes, I'll be able to use it all the time. But I would like to use this in other application as well. It's a good general purpose utility, right? It's a good general purpose base class. Can be used all the places. Would it not be a good idea to have it in the API itself? It should have been in the API, part of the API, right? And that's what it is. We have a class, no, the name of the class is not base servlet. We have a class in the javax.servlet package called the generic servlet. Fine. This is a code which is nearly matching the class called generic servlet. We have this class, we have this as a class. Fine, we don't have to write all this implementation, but of course what we have done is slightly better off than what is there in the API. Okay, in terms of a few things, we have been a little bit more secure. We made a few of those methods as final. And for example, the method which we have, the init method is final, right? Init which takes servlet config as a parameter is final. And the API has not kept it final. The programmer will have to be careful. If he overrides this init with a parameter, he should not forget super.init. Because if he is forgetting the super.init, the initialization of the servlet config would be lost. Okay, and the get servlet config method may not be able to return the proper servlet config object. Things may not work properly. Fine. So that from that point of view, yes, keeping some of those methods final is a good idea, what we have done. But that's not the case in the generic servlet. But yes, you can use it always, but take care. That is the idea. Fine. So fine, we realize, oh, this is a good thing which should go in a servlet. So if we have to write a servlet from now onwards, need not implement the interface. Right? It's not necessary to implement the interface. For the purpose of writing our info servlet, let's have a subclass of, you can choose, because for this project, yes, you have done something like a base servlet you have created. You can either use this or exactly same set of methods is what we have in the class called generic servlet. So what is generic servlet? It is an implementation of servlet and servlet config. It implements servlet and servlet config. Fine. What are the methods? Servlet config, 4 methods were there. Fine. Getting the servlet context, getting the init parameter names, servlet name, 4 methods from there. The other 4 methods, except for the service method, the 4 methods of service. Fine. Init method with parameter. Now for init method with parameter, an additional method was added, which was init without parameter. Okay. Fine. That's what we have. So this is, again, this is what we have in generic servlet. Clear? Generic servlet are exactly these methods. And so, clear what is generic servlet? Methods of servlet, servlet config, plus init without parameter, plus those 2 additional methods, log methods, and to make it convenient. And these are just convenient methods. Okay. Fine. So when you write your servlet class, you should be able to just use log. That's it. Okay. Fine. In the base class, log. Yeah, it's a public method which is inherited. Just say log and log a message, and a throwable. Any exception you may like to log. And so that's a full code for base class. Okay, so fine, you should be able to try this now. Okay, so info servlet, you can now use generic servlet. Fine. Maybe you may, or if you prefer, you can write this code and also write your own. You can write your class by extending from base servlet also. Fine. Clear? Okay. And so this was just to introduce the class called generic servlet. And we understood what is generic servlet now. We even know almost how it may have been written. And nothing much, it's very simple. Right? Each of those methods, 1-line method, right? Except for this init method, which is 2 lines. Okay, so fine. So next, I think what you should be doing is the, now what we can do is, yes, what we have looked at is the general part, generic part of the API. Fine, we have not seen anything which is specific to HTTP protocol yet. Fine, there are things which are specific to HTTP protocol. Okay, in HTTP protocol, we would have a HTTP method, whether it is a GET request or a POST request, and things may have to be done differently. If it is a GET request, I'd like to do this way. If it's a POST request, I'd like to do this way. Fine. So making things, let's move towards a more HTTP specific API. Fine. We'll start to look at the HTTP specific API, the request object. The request object here is very general. It's not specific to HTTP. The response also is general, not specific to HTTP. Okay, HTTP has got headers. Fine. Here we don't talk of headers in request. We don't talk of headers in the response. HTTP has headers, right? Fine. You want to know the header which has come as part of a request. Fine. So yeah, but fine. So before we try that, yes, you should be able to try out the methods of servlet context and servlet config in your info servlet. Right? Okay, fine. So we'll continue tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll check. We can have some practice session for trying out methods of servlet context and servlet config. Servlet request, servlet context. Those methods can be tried out. Fine, and then later we'll move towards HTTP specific API.